History is filled with wars, kings, and revolutions. But what about the truly strange moments that changed everything? From molasses floods to wars over football matches. Today we're uncovering the bizarre events that shaped our world in ways you wouldn't believe. Here are 20 strange moments that changed history. Number 20. The Great Molasses Flood. On January 15, 1919, a giant molasses tank burst in Boston, flooding the surrounding streets with 2.5 million gallons of sticky, sweet molasses. Cars were overturned, buildings were knocked over, and people were stuck to walls and each other. The flood killed 21 people, injured 150, and soaked a large area of the North End. But oddly enough, the sticky goo actually helped some people. Some restaurant owners used the free molasses to make candy, while others added it to their coffee. One man even collected some in a bucket and sold it to a nearby sugar refinery. Number 19. The Football War. Imagine a soccer game getting so heated that it causes a full-blown international war. Well, that's exactly what happened in 1969 when El Salvador and Honduras met on the pitch. Tensions had been building between the two countries for years, both claiming ownership of the same land, and this particular match was meant to help ease those tensions. But when El Salvador scored first, Hondurans got angry. They began throwing rocks at the Salvadoran players, and when the game was called off because of all the chaos, protesters took to the streets. It didn't take long for the Salvadoran military to get involved, and soon both countries had declared war on each other. By the time it was over, more than 6,000 people were dead. Number 18. The Battle of Krentzbes. In October 1788, Austrian soldiers gathered in the town of Krentzbes, preparing for battle against the invading Turks. But there was one major problem. They weren't supposed to be fighting each other. A series of unfortunate events led to hundreds of casualties, including the death of an important general. It all started when an Austrian officer named Laden entered the city. He wanted to inspect his troops, but he wasn't in uniform and no one knew who he was. The guards assumed he was an enemy soldier and opened fire. This caused total havoc, and soldiers began firing wildly in every direction. Eventually, order was restored, but not before the Austrians had killed each other and several civilians. Number 17. Operation Paul Bunyan. During the Cold War, tensions between North Korea and South Korea were high. The two sides were technically still at war, and they faced each other across a line known as the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Things got pretty tense here, especially in 1976 when US and North Korean soldiers argued over the trimming of a tree on the border. The tree was on the North Korean side, but it had grown over into the south. So the Americans decided to do something about it. They brought in a chainsaw and began cutting down the offending branches. Of course, this infuriated the North, and soon the two sides were face to face with weapons drawn. But then the US soldiers did something that shocked everyone. They cut down the entire tree. To them, this was a show of dominance, but to many others, it was seen as a dangerous provocation. And some believed it could have started World War III. Number 16. The Defenestrations of Prague. In May of 1618, political tensions were high in Bohemia. Protestants and Catholics were at odds, and the future of the region hung in the balance. Then on May, things took a very literal turn. Two Catholic regents were thrown out of a window. These were important figures in the region, but how they lost their jobs was highly unusual. They were literally defenestrated, which means thrown out of a window. The two men fell to the ground below, but amazingly, they survived. This was meant to send a message to the Holy Roman Emperor, and it worked. Soon, the Protestant rebels had launched the 30 Years' War, which would last until 1648. Number 15. The Dancing Plague. On July 14, 1518, hundreds of people began dancing uncontrollably in the streets of Strasbourg. At first it was kind of fun, even festive. But within days, the dancers were exhausted and dehydrated. Some collapsed and died right there in the street. Nobody knows why this happened, but historians believe it may have been a form of mass hysteria. This lasted for 4 days. But a similar event happened in Italy a few years later, and it lasted for weeks. But what's the craziest part? We don't know if these were separate incidents or if the dancers simply traveled to Italy afterwards. Number 14. The Emu War. Few animals are as iconic as the emu. These giant flightless birds live in Australia, and they're quite the menace. In 1932, the government decided to wage war on these troublesome creatures. Major Meredith and his men set out to kill as many emus as possible. They had machine guns, but the emus just kept coming. Meredith ordered his men to shoot at the birds' legs, but this only angered the emus. They seemed to realize what was happening and began running away, making it even harder to hit them. After 3 days, the military had killed only a small percentage of the emu population, and they ran out of ammunition. The army declared the mission a failure, and the emus won the war. Number 13. The Cadaver Synod. In 897, Pope Formosus was put on trial. This is a bit strange considering he was dead. His corpse was exhumed and placed on a throne in the middle of a church. Then 7 of his supposed crimes were read aloud, and the assembled cardinals voted on each one. They found him guilty of simony, which is selling church positions to the highest bidder. Afterwards, his body was stripped of its fine clothes and beaten with a stick. Finally, he was thrown into the Tiber River. This was done by the order of Stephen VI, who became pope after Formosus. But just 6 weeks later, Stephen himself was dead. Many suspected poisoning. Number 12. Napoleon attacked by rabbits. Napoleon Bonaparte was famous for defeating armies, but he once got into trouble with a different kind of enemy. In 1807, the French emperor was staying at a country estate when he went on a rabbit hunt. But instead of enjoying the sport, he got into a massive scrape. He and his hunting party were surrounded by rabbits and couldn't move. This continued until they spent almost all their gunpowder. They eventually made it back to the house without being shot, but they had completely missed the point of the hunt. Number 11. The exploding whale. In 1970, a dead whale washed up on the shores of Florence, Oregon. People came from all around to see the massive carcass, but no one thought much of it. That is, until someone got the idea to blow it up. The local Coast Guard was asked for help, and they agreed to tow the whale a few miles offshore and detonate it with explosives. However, this didn't go as planned. The whale exploded, yes, but it also sprayed a huge cloud of whale guts onto the beach and into the air. Pieces of the whale were found for miles around, and dozens of people had to be treated for injuries. What was supposed to be a simple operation turned into a messy disaster. Number 10. A misplaced order. On October 25, 1854, British and French forces attacked the Russians at the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War. There was a lot of confusion and miscommunication, and one order in particular changed the course of the battle forever. Lord Raglan needed to send a message to his troops telling them that they needed to stop attacking at all costs. Unfortunately, the order got mixed up, and instead of saying no desultory attacks, it said no quarter attacks. So when the Light Brigade heard the order, they thought they were being told to attack with everything they had. They charged into the Russian cannons and suffered heavy losses. This is now known as the Charge of the Light Brigade. Number 9. The Beer Flood. In 1814, Londoners were in for a night they'd never forget. Around 10 p.m., a loud explosion was heard near the London brewery of John and George Truman. Then a massive wave of beer crashed through the streets. Homes were destroyed and dozens of people drowned in the foamy liquid. It was 8 feet deep in some places and flowed all the way to the Thames River. Eventually, the river's current helped push the beer back toward the brewery. When all was said and done, 9 people were dead and over 1,000 barrels of beer had been spilled. Number 8. When a chicken survived without a head. On September 10, 1945, a farmer woke up early and beheaded one of his chickens. This was done so that the bird could be served for dinner that evening. But the chicken didn't die right away. In fact, it lived for another 18 months. This is truly amazing, but it wasn't without its challenges. Mike, the headless chicken, had to be fed and watered by hand, and he couldn't fly or walk properly. But he did survive. He became a local celebrity and appeared in newspapers and on the radio. He even earned a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records. Number 7. The Ghost Army. During World War II, the US had a secret weapon, inflatable tanks. No, seriously. This was a real military operation known as the Ghost Army. They specialized in fooling the enemy, and they were particularly good at it. They created inflatable tanks and other military vehicles to roll through the streets and fool German aircraft. They even broadcast fake radio chatter to confuse the enemy. But perhaps their greatest accomplishment was in September 1944. The Ghost Army created a fake invasion force and landed them in Belgium. The Germans were completely fooled and moved thousands of troops to intercept. This left other Allied forces free to capture Antwerp, Belgium, without interference. Number 6. A pig started a war. Pigs have a reputation for being greedy and selfish. Maybe that's why this little pig caused a war. In 1859, a pig wandered onto an island in the San Juan archipelago. This was a disputed territory between the United States and Britain. When American settlers demanded the pig be returned to the US, the British refused. This led to the Pig War, which lasted for 12 years. Things could have gotten violent, but thankfully cooler heads prevailed, and the dispute was eventually settled peacefully. Number 5. When the sun went out, the year is 536 AD, and the sun doesn't shine. For 18 months, Earth is plunged into darkness. This mysterious fog casts shadows across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. People could literally see stars during the day, and nights were filled with brilliant auroras. Agriculture failed across the northern hemisphere, and starvation was widespread. While most of Europe experienced just a few years of cooler temperatures, other regions suffered for decades. Some historians believe the world was in a state of perpetual twilight, but we have no idea what caused it. Number 4. A meteor changed an empire. On May 12, 1492, an Ottoman prince was walking through the streets of Constantinople. Suddenly, the sky lit up and a bright ball of fire streaked across the heavens. It landed far to the southeast and nobody paid it much attention, except Sultan Bayezid II. He saw the meteor as a sign from God that the Ottomans should conquer Constantinople. In fact, he assembled a massive army and laid siege to the city. However, the Ottomans failed to realize the meteor wasn't a sign at all. It simply landed in modern Turkey. Still, the empire's end was swift and brutal. The city was sacked and its treasures divided amongst the Ottoman princes. Number 3. Hitler missed his train. On September 1, 1939, Adolf Hitler stood next to a train, ready to board. He was late, but he had no idea how late. If he had taken that train, he would have been assassinated. Hitler decided to wait for the next train instead. When he arrived in Poland, he found that Soviet leader Joseph Stalin hadn't yet given the order to invade. This gave Germany time to attack without interference, and the Soviets would quickly join in. Hitler's delay saved his life, but it also helped kick off one of the deadliest wars in human history. Number 2. A volcano caused the bicycle to be invented. Carl von Drey was tired of living in a horse. Okay, he didn't actually say that, but he basically felt that way. He lived in 1815, and there was a serious problem. Mount Tambora had erupted the previous year in Indonesia. This caused the year without a summer, which pushed Europe into a brutal winter. People struggled to find food and firewood, so Dries decided to come up with a solution. Why not invent a vehicle that didn't need a horse? It took him a couple tries, but eventually he invented the modern bicycle. Who knows what other inventions the year without a summer inspired? Number 1. A typo started a border dispute. The Canada-US border is one of the longest in the world, but it almost didn't happen. In 1925, the border was being surveyed in Alaska. Someone wrote down the wrong coordinates and nobody realized it for decades. This caused decades of tension and uncertainty. But thankfully, things were resolved peacefully and the mistake was corrected. Still, it makes you wonder, could a simple typo start a war? Sometimes, the strangest events can have the biggest impact. Which one of these bizarre moments surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another strange chapter of history.